You're listening to Story Struck. I'm Rachel, an editor and writing coach.
And I'm Nino, a ghostwriter and book coach. Welcome to our curious community where we dive into everything books and writing.
Now, let's get into the episode. So today we are very excited to have Kacey Ezell on the podcast. She has authored and co-authored over 15 books, which just to me is, oh my goodness, I'm working on my first book and I know how much work that is, so I cannot imagine being that epic of a writer.
I've been doing it a little while.
You do it a little while? All right.
Yeah.
That's so bad then. I was like in the back of the scenes doing ghostwriting nonfiction books. And I'm shifting into fiction, which I'm excited to kind of talk with you later, how you have kind of shifted your genres too. So you have primarily focused on military sci-fi, and now you're kind of dipping your toe in fantasy. I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, how you got into writing fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kacey Ezell, and I got into writing fiction because I was I was a very bossy and imaginative child. That I was the kind of girl who, like, I would marshal up all of our friends on the playground and be like, okay, today we're gonna play kingdoms, and you're gonna be the king, and I'm gonna be the sorceress, and you're gonna be the princess, and like I would assign my friends roles for them to pretend. And sometimes they went along with it, and sometimes they were like, no, we don't want to listen to you today. But it was one of those things where, so my friend and publisher, Toni Weisskopf from Baen Books, she has a saying where she says, writers write because they can't help it. And I've kind of found that to be true in my life. Like, I remember making up stories and telling them to my mom and visitors and stuff, like even when I was super little. My mom has a super embarrassing story about me being 2 years old and telling a group of very nice young LDS missionaries who came to the door about how, you know, when I go to bed, my husband comes home from work and gets into bed with me, but I don't like it because his legs are hairy. So you can imagine these young men with this 2-year-old telling them this fanciful tale. Anyway, yeah, so to a certain extent, story has always been a part of my life. I was one of those kids who I started reading really early and like read ravenously as I was growing up all throughout school. And stories have really like impacted the course of my life, the choices that I make. I'm fond of telling people, and it is in fact true, I'm such a big nerd that I read Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of the Pern series when I was a young kid, preteen and teenager, and I wanted to be a dragon rider so badly that I decided to go to the Air Force Academy and become a pilot, and that's what I did. So
there you go. You practically rode dragons there, right? So
yeah, I mean, I looked around at 9 years old and was like, not a lot of dragons around, but that's a helicopter, and I could probably learn to fly that. So, so that's what I did. So it was very natural, because I was always writing and consuming and reading story. It was a very natural extension of that to move to writing. Writing the stories down. And one of the things that played a big role in that, honestly, was online fan fiction, particularly Dragon Riders of Pern fan fiction. So that was sort of my first experience with community-based storytelling, if that makes sense. I met some of like my best friend in the world. I met her writing Dragon Riders of Pern fan fiction. We wrote together for probably 12 years before we met in person. And now she and I have written 4 novels and counting together. So. Yeah, her name's Marisa Wolf. She and I wrote the assassin books together about the alien cat assassins, and then we also wrote this January Blood of Her Father, which is in my space opera universe that came out. That she and I co-wrote. So yeah,
so many books are going on my TBR list right now.
Well, I hope you enjoy them. So
that is so cool. And like, what is it? Because You were in the military for a hot minute. Are you still in the military, or are you?
No, I served for 23 years in the United States Air Force, and then I retired in 2022.
So you were writing while you were being this badass military person.
Well, I mean, thank you for saying that. That's a very kind compliment. But yeah, I was writing because, again, it started off as something fun that I did. And one of the I don't want to say struggles, but one of the things that I've tried to be very intentional about in my career is to keep writing fun, because it's kind of like flying, in that it's really hard to do. So it's not worth it if it's not a good time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and the other thing too, with in the military, right? That is a lot of work, right? It's a busy job, and it takes up a lot of your life. Plus, you have, other people in your life, right? And one of the things I notice a lot of writers really struggle with is, like, they'll really want to write this book. They'll have this book like just living rent free in their life, but then like life just keeps getting in the way, and I work full time, or I do this, or I do that. And so what is something that you have found that helped you prioritize writing in your life when life is just so busy, or life is just lifing? Like, how do you, like, because usually it's, I think, especially when you're socialized as female, we're trained so much to put everything else and everybody else ahead of what we want. So even if we really want to write that book, we'll put our kids in front of it. We'll put our job in front of it. So how did you start prioritizing your writing in order to become such a prolific writer with such a heavy, busy life?
So that's an interesting question, because the truth is, when I was on active duty, besides serving my own military career, I also was a military brat. Both my parents did over 20 years on active duty in the Air Force. And so I saw, as I was growing up, I saw my mother and father, which was a little bit unusual back at the time in the 80s, that both of my parents served. Now it's more common, but I saw that there were times when, because of the military career, my parents had to temporarily prioritize work over the needs of the family. For example, so my mother was a JAG, and she was doing a case where it was I think it was a child abuse case, and sorry, I probably should have trigger warned, but it was necessary for her to be at this trial, to shepherd her very young witness through their testimony, and I hope I'm not using words that make it sound like she wasn't doing something correct. She was. It was just, she was the attorney who had prepared the witness. She was the attorney that had like a connection with this. This was a kid who was, I think, like 6 years old, and they had to, at the last minute, change the trial date, and she had already committed to coming on this field trip with my middle school class and trying to chaperone. But she sat me down and she was like, "Listen, they changed this trial date. I need to ask your forgiveness, because I'm going to let you down here. But I really need to go do this to one, to take care of my witness, and two, to make sure that justice is served." And I of course, I was sad that my mom didn't get to come with me to this like fun field trip. I think we were going to like the presidential palace in Manila. This is when my parents were stationed in the Philippines. So it was like a really cool field trip, right? And I remember being sad that she couldn't come, but I did appreciate that she took the time to say, "Hey, look, first of all, I'm sorry. This is necessary, but here's why it's necessary." And she explained it to me. And from that experience and others like it, I learned that while in the grand scheme of things, my parents always prioritized me. And it was both of my parents, right? Both my mom and my dad. They were both very, very involved as like parental figures in the lives of me, my sister, my brother. And but there were times, because of their military career, because of the oaths that they'd sworn, that they were going to have to temporarily put work ahead of us. And so that was something that I brought into, that I just sort of grew up with, a mindset that I just sort of grew up with, especially as I made the choice to become a military officer in my own life, in my own career. And so when I started, when I so I have two daughters, and I'm married, but at first, it was just me and my oldest daughter. I was a single mom for a while. And during that time that I was a single mom, I actually deployed to Iraq for a year. And my youngest, she was 6. And I did the same thing with her. I sat her down and I was like, listen, here's a situation. I'm being called to go do this thing. And I want to do it. It's the right thing to do. This is my job. But I want you to know that, like, here's how this is going to go. I'm going to make sure that you're taken care of. You're going to stay with grandpa. You're going to be, you're not going to have to leave your house. Like, there was a whole thing. And same thing with her, right? Like, I know that was hard for her, but I think she appreciated that I was able to articulate to her, I've got to put work first right now. I can't be your mom first right now, but it's temporary. And when I come back, I will always be your mom. And so that's a little bit of a digression, but that's sort of my mindset when it comes to, like, work-life balance overall, to include writing, right? When I was on active duty, my identities were in order of importance, mom and wife, right? Like, right up front, because I wanted to prioritize those relationships, military officer, and then writer, because as a military officer, that's how I was earning a living for the family. And now that I've retired, and my husband is the primary breadwinner, my identities are, again, in order: mom and wife, and then full-time writer. And so what that does is that kind of conceptualizing it that way allows me to kind of think, okay, what's most important in this moment? Is it most important? Is it going to be the best long-term game for the family if I ignore everyone for the rest of this week and let them fend for themselves in making dinner while I knock out this book and turn it in on deadline and get the advance that I, am entitled to once I turn it in? Maybe the answer is yes, right? Maybe the answer is no, but it gives me a framework to ask those questions. And I did the same thing kind of while I was on active duty. But one of the things that I never did was I never quit writing, because I knew in my soul, just as an individual, as a person, that story was so important to me that I started writing because I wanted to read the stories that existed in my head, right? And so if that was important to me, that was a thing that I needed to do. And so I would steal time. It would be things like, okay, it's a Saturday, and my husband's taking the girls out to do something, and it's not something that I'm interested in doing. So I'm going to stay home and I'm going to write for a couple hours, or I'm going to grab a 30-minute sprint before I go to bed tonight. Or, hey, I'm at work, but it's my lunch hour and they don't care what I do on my lunch hour. So I'm going to, I bring my laptop from home and I'm going to get on my personal laptop and write for 30 minutes on my lunch hour, or whatever, because of the nature of my job. I had a couple of assignments where we would do like 24-hour alerts. So when you would be there at the alert facility, and if it wasn't part of the workday and you weren't actually flying or doing flying duties, people would just hang out. You'd watch movies together and cook together and things like that. I did a lot of writing in the alert facility at Joint Base Andrews. I was stationed for a while, so you find the time and kind of make that work.
So it's like just about determining that it's a priority, just like your family, just like your work. Like, it has to hold weight. It can't just be some sort of like, oh, well, this is just some fun thing I'm doing on the side. Like, I think once you're publishing, and once you have the literary agent, the publisher, like, you have that external pressure, it maybe is easier. But like, I just finished the draft for my first novel. Rachel's working on her first novel.
Congratulations.
And and so it's this extra like, you don't have that extra pressure. You just have like that internal drive, and sometimes that internal drive is it doesn't drive.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're like, so I'm having a hard time getting my edits done before sending over to Rachel as my editor. And so, you know, how do we put that same weight into the priority of it that we do with our family or with our work and things like that. So I think maybe having like that writer community, like you had your writing bestie, and having that, you know, person say like, hey, let's work on us together, or like, hey, you know, like, how are things coming? Like, I want to read your next chapter, or things like that could be really helpful for people who are struggling with that accountability piece.
For sure. Yeah.
Right,
community is a huge piece of it. I have and the good thing is that I feel like the resources for community, for authors, are only expanding. So I wrote a lit RPG novel that I released in April, right before I released Magelight, and that one, like, I totally self-published. It was 100% an experiment. I had so much fun, but when I dipped my toes into the lit RPG world, I realized like it's almost like a parallel evolution of writer world happening alongside, you know, the writer world that I've been a part of for, I don't know, since 2010 now. So in that lit RPG writer world, they make use of a lot of like community tools like Discord and you know, subreddits and a lot of like sort of online community spaces. And it was really, really interesting to me to kind of become a part of that and really invest in that and get to know people. And it was kind of fun because I would come in and they'd be like, holy smokes, you're traditionally published, like, teach us your magic. And I'm like, bro, the things that I know may or may not work for you, but here they are, you know? And so it was really great to be able to sort of kind of cross-contaminate, which has a negative connotation, but you know what I mean, across the information that was going on in that lit RPG heavy space, as opposed to the more traditional fantasy and science fiction space that I had been used to working with. But in all cases, you're right. Community is important, you know, finding not just accountability partners, but, you know, finding beta readers and finding editors and finding cheerleaders. A couple of friends of mine and I, we have a little YouTube podcast we do called The Feral Ladies. And one of the things that we talked about was who you need on your team for one of our episodes. And one of the things we talked about is that, like, yes, you absolutely need that hard-nosed editor who's going to come in and be like, okay, this sucks. You need to rework this. You know, yeah, you need that feedback, right? Yeah. But that's not the only feedback you need. You also need someone that you can send your stuff to that's going to be like, this is amazing. When do I get the rest of it? You know, because it's important to have that balance. And one of the things that I value, my friends, two of my friends in particular, Marisa Wolf, who I alluded to before as my writing bestie. She's my bestie too, but Marisa Wolf and then Melissa Olthoff, the three of us, we all alpha read for each other, and they can do both. And so there are times when I send it to them and I'm like, okay, here it is. I need a cheerleader. And they're like, great, we love it. You know, and then there are times when I send it to them and I'm like, okay, I don't know if this scene works. Let me know what you think. And they'll give me a much more critical read, and be able to not just support my ego, although that's important too.
Yeah, I think that's kind of letting people know what type of feedback you want up front. Like when I worked as a ghostwriter with nonfiction, and they wanted to send their work out, and like they would send it to like the sister-in-law, someone, and they would just like send back and like totally bash or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, number one, is your sister-in-law your ideal reader? Because if she's not, then I think we need to toss all this feedback. But then I also would suggest, you know, tell them what you're looking for. Especially when you're in that drafting stage, it is raw, it's not polished. And if the person's not a writer, they're going to be like, oh my God, you're terrible. You're never going to, like, it's just, so that's why it's so important, like you said, to have that writing community. And I was a military spouse for 17 years. And so yeah, I love being able to have these online communities because it was so hard, as you know, like to form in-person community. And so it's been such a mindset shift to me now that like
Mhm.
I'm not a military spouse anymore. Like I'm actually somewhere where I'm gonna stay. Like I can actually see on the wall.
It's
Like
weird, right? Like
it's weird.
that's been a big shift for me too, because like I said, I grew up as a military brat as well. So, thinking like, oh, this is my this is my grocery store. This is the grocery store I'm gonna go to for, the next however many years.
Yeah. So it's like if you can't find a writing community where you are, like I live very rural. My next door neighbors are cows and chickens.
Nice.
I know that I can have that writing group online and be able to access people from all over. And that just, it makes me so excited to see all of the different things we have available now for writing communities. Do you have any suggestions of like how you found writing communities or writing partners to work with?
Yes. So I have relatively recently, again, in part because of that lit RPG book that I wrote, which is called Shadow Card Guardian. I should probably say the name of it. It's I kind of dipped my toe into Reddit and the subreddits that exist there. Reddit is actually, I mean, it can be a brutal place, but it's actually, there are a lot of like writing focused communities, and there's a lot of reader communities there too. And as a writer, I would recommend that you join both, right? You join both to see, okay, is this group, I think I want to write a fantasy novel. Join the fantasy, the fantasy subreddit to see, okay, what are people liking? What are they reading? What are they, not necessarily to write to market, but just to kind of get a sense of, okay, well, who's the audience for this? What do they want? How am I going to, to tailor my vision to something that is going to be, not just palatable, but desirable by these people. And then as an outgrowth of that, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have hiccups. As an outgrowth of that, you may find that you get, invites to slightly more interactive platforms like Discord, which has now happened to me twice, because, people who interact on Reddit, sometimes they want like a little bit more focused conversation, and it's easier to do that over on Discord. So I highly recommend Reddit, I highly recommend Discord. Even on Facebook, right? Join your favorite, if you're old like me and you still use Facebook, join your favorite authors like Facebook fan pages, and just talk to people and kind of see what they're into. Another great resource that actually has paid huge dividends in my career. In fact, I can trace every novel contract I have ever signed back to attendance at an in-person science fiction fantasy convention.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So sci-fi fantasy conventions are an amazing resource if you're writing in science fiction and fantasy. And I suspect that like if you're writing like romance, because I know that there are romance fan conventions that happen as well. I suspect it's a similar phenomenon. I just don't know from personal experience. But going to these in-person fan conventions, first of all, it's super fun. It can be, some of the larger ones can be a little bit overwhelming if you're a little bit more of an introverted person. But I'm kind of an extreme extrovert, so I freaking love Dragon Con in Atlanta, Georgia on Labor Day weekend. It's like my Super Bowl every year. It's like you and 80,000 of your closest friends partying for 5 days almost 7 days now in costume in Atlanta. So it's phenomenal. But going to these conventions and just geeking out about the things that I'm passionate about has led me to so many relationships with people who are also writers or who are editors or who are publishers. My very first pro sale was an anthology called Citizens that was edited by a guy by the name of John Ringo, who's a New York Times bestselling military science fiction author. I met John Ringo at DragonCon. We became friends because I was in my 20s at the time and I was very cute and I was wearing very cute little skirt clothes, and we met, like his group and my group, we all met on the cigar deck or on the smoking deck of the Hyatt, where we were all smoking cigars together, and we got to talking about the military, and he found out I was a helicopter pilot, and so he was asking me helicopter questions, and from that we corresponded, and he knew that I wrote, he knew that I had a creative writing degree, and so when this opportunity came up for this anthology of military science fiction written by military veterans, he thought of me and he invited me to contribute a story, and that became my first pro sale. So really, it is all about the power of friendship, right? I can't stress that community piece enough. So
that's something that Rachel and I have talked about, in doing this podcast. One of the things that we wanted to offer people was not only this space where they can hear and learn, because people like me who took the very long way around to the writing career, we don't know where to begin, or my clients working in the nonfiction coaching space and stuff like that, they're usually business owners and stuff, and they just have this memoir idea, or they but they don't know what, they're the fish out of water, they're not writers by nature and stuff. And so we wanted to grow this community to have a space where not only you could listen to the podcast and learn, but eventually build an actual community, an actual online platform where you can get extra guidance, where you can meet other authors, with whether that in fiction or nonfiction space is have that extra connection, because writing itself is such a solitary journey. And when it's not your full on calling, right? You're a coach, but you have this amazing memoir that you think could really, and you feel called to write it, but you're not a writer, and to have that community piece can be the difference between it happening and not happening. I would not have finished my novel. I would not have even considered writing a novel if it wasn't for Rachel. Rachel is the reason why my book exists, because she was sitting here as my cheerleader, and I just had this crazy idea, but I don't know, I've never written anything like that before. And she's like, are you kidding me? You need to write this. And that little bit of community can be such a make or break for people. So that was something that we really are looking towards building, and in with this podcast is creating that space for people, because people like Rachel who live in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to take her 2 hours to get to a place that more people are. Right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
One of the things we really wanted to talk to you about is the jump that you made from the military science fiction space into fantasy, and that feeling of not being sure if this is going to be something that's going to be received well, or that's even going to be picked up, and doing it anyways. Can you tell us about that transition that you made, or that journey that you had with that?
Absolutely. So like I said, I kind of got started writing military science fiction in large part because of my military background, right? Everybody wants a pilot to write about aviation things, and I've done quite a bit of that and enjoyed it very much. But as I was growing up, I was always a fantasy reader, right? And so in the back of my head, I always knew, I never said, oh, I want to be a military science fiction writer. It was always, I want to be a fantasy and sci-fi writer, or a science fiction and fantasy writer, right? They were always linked for me. So I had, I had, gosh, I don't know. I don't even know how many books out. But I've always sort of, and I somewhat jokingly, but also really not, utilize the term, I identify as genre fluid, because besides military sci-fi, I've also written alternate history and military focused alternate history, and then my first trilogy that I wrote solo is not really sci-fi. It's sort of alternate history, but there's some fantasy elements too, because the main characters are psychic, so it's a series about psychic women at war, which, how the hell do you market that? I don't know. But it's there.
I don't know,
and I
but I
wrote
will
it.
buy them all.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed them. I certainly enjoyed them because, again, it goes back to my reason for writing. Like, I write the stories I want to read. And so when the story for Magelight started kind of percolating in my head, and it is a departure. It's not only a departure for me, but it's also kind of a departure for my publisher, because I knew that I wanted to offer it to Baen, and Baen is very well known for hard science fiction and for military focused stuff. And I have previous, alternate history novels and some like post-apocalyptic stuff that I've published with Baen. I have a very good relationship with them. They're a wonderful publisher. But this is a fantasy novel that's basically a D&D party that incorporates a reverse harem romance, which is not so much like what they're known for. And it's not that Baen shies away from romance. They don't, they've published like Lois McMaster Bujold always had, a romance subplot or two in her books. But I didn't know, right? But I couldn't not write the story. I had to write the story. And so I'm fortunate in that I have multiple publishing avenues open to me, because not only do I publish with Baen, but I also publish independently with Chris Kennedy Publishing, which is a smaller press. They at the time they were also doing they also had a fantasy imprint, which is they've basically since closed down. But my thought process was, well, if this isn't right for Baen, maybe it'll be right for Chris. And if it's not right for Chris, then, I've got to write it anyway. It won't leave me alone. So I will just then explore self-publishing, which was exactly what I did with the Lit RPG project and learned a lot. And it was really fun. So I wrote the book and I reached out to Tony, the publisher at Baen, and I was like, hey, so I have this thing. I don't know if you'll be interested in it. And she was like, well, send it over and let's take a look. And she took a look and got back with me, and did like a 4-hour developmental edit call with me, which I'm so grateful for, because she doesn't have the time to do that for everyone. So that really meant a lot to me, because it meant she saw something worthwhile in the story, right? And so going through those edits kind of page by page, making it, really shining the project up, making it what it had the potential to be, was this whole, that in and of itself was a whole process. But afterwards, I was so grateful, because I was so happy with how it turned out. And she was like, well, let's do this then, you've made the edits, let's publish it. I believe in this. And so we decided to bring it out. And again, it was a little bit of a risk, because traditionally, Baen's audience is not the traditional romantasy audience. But it occurred to me that fantasy's having a moment right now. Romantic fantasy is having a moment. Romantasy is having a moment. And in my head, they're all three different. And I can go into that if you want. Why couldn't Baen attract some romantic fantasy fans, right? Why couldn't romantasy readers look at Baen books for their next feet kicking, heart clenching read? Why not, right? And it was one of those things where it was like, I had kind of an epiphany where it was like, if I am never going to be a superstar following someone else's path. I've got to write my stories. I've got to build my community. I've got to write, create my narrative, not just like the narrative story, story narrative, but like the narrative of my life. I've got to create that. And I can't follow in anyone else's footsteps, because, if I follow Rachel Clare's footsteps, then I'm trying to live Rachel Clare's life. And I'm not good at being Rachel Clare. Rachel Clare's good at being Rachel Clare. You know what I mean? Like I'm the only person who can be me, but I've got to commit and kind of do it my way, if that makes sense. Now that doesn't mean I don't take input. It doesn't mean I don't take direction. But it does mean that I gotta maybe do something a little risky, like releasing a fantasy book with a reverse harem subplot to a largely male audience. So, and hoping to draw in the, additional audience members that are going to like the book. So.
Yeah, I think I don't know what it is about romantasy right now and the like, because it really feels like it's because I'm not a romantasy reader. I like fantasy, anything with magic in it and stuff. My books are romantasy, and I did not plan that. It just happened. So I don't know what's in the universe right now that's like, listen, writers, we need some more romantasy here.
Yeah.
Like, even mine is just like, that wasn't planned. And so yeah, I don't know where that came from.
I think so it's interesting because I'm a history buff and I've been reading for a very long time, and I look back at some of like my favorite epic fantasy reads from when I was a kid, and many, if not most of them, included some kind of romantic subplot line, right? Yeah. Because the fact is, as humans, we have certain drives, and those drives, push us to create bonds with other humans. That's just part of our nature. And so when you're telling stories about humans, even if they're humans disguised as other types of creatures like, I don't know, fae or whatever, those drives are still there, right? Because we're still humans telling the story. So it really isn't that far of a stretch, but I think part of it, is the way it's been marketed, right? With the advent of, Book Talk and Bookstagram and the online marketing, with these sexy little pictures and things like that. It's kind of easy to hook people with that, because again, universal drives, right? We all want to be loved. We all want to be protected. We all want to have someone worth fighting for, right?
Yes, I love that, the concept of the universal drives, because whenever you're reading a fantasy, right, it always has to come down to one of those things or multiple of those things in order, like fighting for home, or the fighting for those you love. Why are we going on that journey? And one of the things that Rachel and I literally sit there and talk about for ever is like that character psychology and like that internal motivation that our characters go on, and like why like this one book, it made me so mad because I'm like, this doesn't make any psychological sense. Yeah. Like, I loved all of the concepts of the book. I love everything about this, like theoretically everything about this book. But like the psychology of the character doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not somebody that you can, like, I can't see myself as this character. And so, and that's one of the things that story gives us, is it helps us live another life. Because we can see ourselves as this character and moving in this and in this like ethereal world or this other dimension as this other character. And when we don't have those universal desires that are driving us forward or driving that character forward, we're just like, we can't put ourselves in that position, because we'd be like, but I really care about that lady, like I really want to get with that person. Why don't they get with that person or whatever? So I like that perspective, because like I agree, like romance is because we all want connection, and so it is intertwined in a lot of the fantasy books that we read, and now it just has a special name, kind of. Well, and it occurs to me that you could probably look, like, there's probably something, if you dug into this idea of, because what is romantasy, right? It is here's my definition of romantasy, and this is why I say Magelight is not a romantasy. But a romantasy is a romance novel. So the central question at the core of the story is, are these people going to get together or won't they? So it's a romance novel that is set in a fantasy world where there are fantasy elements that are integral to the plot of whether or not these people get together, right? So if you look at that, you could kind of break that down into two concepts: connection and escapism. And after, particularly, there's probably some
correlation there, and I'm just riffing on this right now, so none of this is scientific, but there's probably some correlation there to the events of like 2020 and 2021 lockdowns and not being able to connect with people the way that we normally would, and the scramble that we all went through to still fulfill those needs for connection and community when the ways in which we would normally achieve those ends were unavailable to us. And also it was a hard time. Like there was so much anxiety, there was so much fear, there was so much division and anger, and a lot of those things still echo through to this day. So it totally makes sense to me that there would be a sort of collective craving, if you will, for those two elements of connection and escapism.
As a psychologist in the house, I completely agree.
I didn't realize you were a psychologist. That's awesome.
I have a PhD in health psychology, so that's why I geek out on like character development and motivation.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like I'm like, it's interesting to see how that, like, all of the things that we've done in our life feed into our writing careers, like your background and how that impacts the military aspects and understanding those. And then me, like, I'm nerding out on like doing this elaborate backstory for this like character. It makes them real. And so then when I'm writing them, it's not just a flat character. Like you can tell by the way that they're interacting and responding in the world, even though they're not a major character, that like that's an actual like person and I can connect with them. It's not a throwaway person that's in the book, that it could exist without them there. So yeah, that's my nerd out space, is that, and
that's awesome. Having
conversations with them in the room. My husband's like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, dude, well, I'm talking with this character and we're trying to figure stuff out right now. He's not behaving.
I am very fond of joking that I have an advanced degree in armchair psychology, simply from like reading so many books and like and doing exactly what you say, where I'm looking into like, okay, but why though? Why is this guy evil? That's one of the things that like I can tell if I'm going to like a book or not like a book by why is the villain doing what they're doing? If they're doing it, if the answer is just they're evil, then I'm out.
Yeah,
like that. Yeah, nobody's evil for no reason.
Yeah,
nobody's evil for no reason.
Complex characters are so freaking vital. I mean, like, this is something that I could talk about for hours, but I'm going to, because we'll just have another podcast where we just talk about character and character psychology. We'll just have a whole other episode on it. But like, what makes a good story good is when you can almost get behind the villain. Right? Like where you get them enough to where you're like, okay, I understand why you're doing this. Yeah. But you're going about it the wrong way, bro. Or like something along those lines. That's what makes the best villain. And I think, when we like, movies are something that people can all like understand, and when you have like this movie villain that is just flat and two-dimensional, like we see with a lot of the old Disney films, you're just like, okay, well that guy's just like bad, and we just like meh, But then we start bringing in these more complex characters where you actually feel for the villain, where and that brings so much more depth to the story, and it translates so much more into our real lives. We can actually bring something from that into our real life because we can understand, right? Okay, well, I'm the villain in this person's story, and so like this is why I am doing this, and why, and you can think about like, is this the best way to do this or whatever, and vice versa with people who are villains in your story, right? You can see that ex-boyfriend or whatever and just be like, okay, he was awful and all of this stuff, and I definitely made the right decision, but I can have empathy for this person because I understand that childhood trauma that he had, or whatever. And so it helps us bring more of that balance into our life. And we get that through fiction. Like we actually just had a podcast episode we recorded that is all about the impact of fiction, because, fiction has the potential to create a chain reaction, to change things, to activate things within the reader. and we can literally make a global difference with the stories we tell. And I did also want to mention, I know we're like trying to wrap up on time here too, but like I did also want to mention, when you were talking about, you know, you have to write as Kacey, you can't write as Rachel, right? You have to follow your own path with it. And it just reminded me of that old saying, you know, we're all stories in the end. It's just like, when you're wanting to write your stories, you have to identify that you're writing a story right now as you in your life. Like, this is your story. You are the author of your own story, and how you move, like what your next chapter is so pivotal. And in the group that we're part of, we had that challenge that Taylor Eaton had in, we're both part of the Wealth Vibe community. And the challenge was to, like, you know, if you're the main character of the story, why is this happening to you? Yeah. And that was so unbelievably profound for me, because I was going through a very, very hard time. And so I'm like, okay, as a writer, if I were writing this story, because I am, why would this character be going through this hard time?
Yeah.
Because as a writer, those hard times are pivotal, you know, right. Like,
yeah, they exist to develop the character. They exist to induce some sort of change so that the character can be who you need them to be at the climax of the story.
Exactly. So if we are to look at ourselves as both the main character and the writer of the story, how are we doing that? What is this developing for us? This hard time that we're having, what is this developing for our character? And what does that mean for the future of this story that we're writing? And having that, I don't know, it feels very multidimensional kind of viewpoint of yourself as a writer, I think can be so transformational for people and such. But yeah, I just I feel like we could talk for forever.
So could you tell us, Kacey, is Magelight available now, or is it releasing soon?
Yes, it is available now. It came out in hardback and ebook on May 6th, so you can go get it wherever you prefer to buy your books. It will also be coming out, and this will be the first time I'm announcing this on a podcast. You know, breaking news. Just found out that, so we signed a contract with Podium Entertainment to produce the audiobook, and that audiobook will be coming out on the 16th of September. So if you're an audio listener, look for that. So
awesome. That's so exciting. And it's
there on a bit of a book tour too, aren't you? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, I've been doing some, you know, some podcasts and some things like that too. Two of the friends that I mentioned earlier, along with some other writers, a lot of us have fantasy. We just all sort of wrote fantasy novels at the same time, and so we decided that we were just really going to push for. You know, kind of do a big marketing push this summer. We're calling it Feral for Fantasy. So we've been, you know, marketing, promoting each other's stuff and posting about each other's stuff and, you know, reaching out to local bookstores, particularly here near where I live, because my best friend lives down the road. And so we're kind of like teaming up to go knock on doors and be like, hey guys, we wrote books. They're really cool. Do you want to do a thing? We can do a thing.
Well, I know you're going to be near-ish to me, and so I'm going to go to that Barnes and Noble that you're going to be at. So
are you near Lemon?
In real life to get an autographed copy. So I'm very excited about that.
That'll be amazing. I'll bring you a present. I have presents. I'll bring them to you. So. Yeah.
I'm so jealous.
I'll bring extra. And
maybe I'll see if I can plan a road trip. Get someone to watch the chickens.
The chickens and the cows are like, what the heck, Rachel? We're not good enough for you.
If I come, I'll bring you eggs.
That's an amazing gift.
Right? Primo.
Yeah, my neighbor has chickens, and occasionally I will bring over baked goods and she will hand me eggs in return. It's a mutually satisfactory relationship.
Love it.
So Kacey, is there anywhere that you'd like people to follow you? I know you mentioned a podcast. Like, let us know all the places that we can follow you.
And
Sure.
we'll also put it in the description below.
Okay. So the best place to find me is kaceyezell.net or .com. Either one works. That's my website where you can see all of my books. You can also join my fan community, which is I call the Dragon's Ford. And a basic membership is totally free. You'll get my newsletter. You'll get access to some free short stories and also access to my fan Discord, my private fan Discord, where we just kind of hang out. We talk writing, we talk books, we talk all kinds of things. There's a raccoon fight club. It's a big deal. Yeah. In addition to that, there's also a couple of like paid supporter levels where if you want early access, like as soon as I finish the chapters of books, I post them there for my paid supporters. You can check that out as well. So that's fun. In addition to that, all my social media links are on my website too. So, Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever it's called, Instagram. I don't think my TikTok is on there because I haven't linked it yet, but I'm also on TikTok. So you just search for Kacey Ezell and you'll find me. And then there's one more thing I'd like to add if you don't mind, because I was trying to work it in, but then we changed topics. And anyway, talking about like resources, online resources and online community for writers. One of the best that I've ever found it's called the Heart Breathings Writing Community. And it was started by Sarah Cannon. She has a YouTube channel called Heart Breathings, where she talks about writerly things and planning for writing and things of that nature. And then there's also a large Facebook community called the Heart Breathings Writing Community, where they do literally every day, they will get on, they have different people host, and they will get on Zoom, or not Zoom, but YouTube, and they will do live sprints, and you can sprint right alongside them, where they'll, chat during the breaks and do the sprints. And it's a phenomenal resource when you just need to knuckle down and, get the words down. Go do some sprints with them. Everybody's very, very helpful, very, very cheerleading, and it's a huge community, and it's pretty genre agnostic, right? So even if you're like, man, everybody's writing fiction, but I'm trying to write my memoir, or I'm trying to write a nonfiction, there's still someone there in that community who I guarantee is working on stuff like what you are. So it's a great place to find, writing buddies.
Absolutely fantastic. All right, I'm excited. All the things I'm going to go check out now, and I cannot wait to see how you do your Discord. I am in my husband's Discord in his gaming community, and it's and I'm like, I need some writerly Discord and our Sea of Thieves, fun stuff here. So I'm so excited to check out all of those, and I will hopefully, fingers crossed, see if I can get out that way this weekend. If not, I know Nino's going to have a blast getting to see you in person. And thank you.
I can't wait. That's going to be
fun.
Time.
Minimum will FaceTime you. It's fine.
There we go. Yeah,
yeah, we could do that. That'd be fun.
And I'll FaceTime with the chickens and be like, "You're missing out. You gotta."
Oh yeah, go hang out with the chickens.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining our podcast. And we will have the links to everything we talked about below. So that way everyone has all of the resources and can all go out and buy your.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure talking with you guys.
Thank you for listening. Check out the show notes for details and links from the episode. And don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Special thanks to our composer, Micah Silverstein. Enjoy the rest of the music.